I'm here to give rules that are specific to the state of Oklahoma. Many of the rules differ from Texas to Oklahoma. We've started, we have three different types of rules for soil farming or land applying this material. And it depends upon which rule we're talking about. One of them refers to soil farming, and another one refers to land applying, and we just use both terms to mean the same thing. And I will probably go back and forth between those two terms. So this is where it all starts with an oil rig. And the reason we have gone to land applying drilling mud is that these companies have for years put the mud into reserve pits at the well site. They would cover them and then they would leave them there. They were required to have initially 2 feet of soil over the pits. Then we went to 3, and we found out that after 10, 20, 30 years, that level will decrease and we will have salts coming to the surface. So a lot of companies are going to soil farming as the answer to this. If we want oil, they've got to drill for it, and if they drill for it, they will produce this waste. So we can either have it in controlled situations, or it's going to end up in creeks, rivers, bar ditches, and roads. And so that's why we've come up with these rules. This is one type of reserve pit, or one type of pit that you find at a well site. This guy's getting ready to attach a hose to pull out the mud. This is an 80-barrel tank. We require that it be no larger than 80 barrels, and we've set that up so that it doesn't leave tracks in your field. We don't want it to compact the soil, and we've limited it to 80 barrels. If it's larger than that, it's an illegal tank. At this point, at some time in this filling process, the driver is required to take a sample of the mud and determine the amount of salt in the mud. And then he can calculate how far he can go to spread it. This is the business end of the spreader. We used to use spreader bars. It had they'd stick out about 6 feet. They had holes in them, and they would spray down. Those would fill with tiny rocks, with rock cuttings, and they didn't give us an even pattern. So we've gone to this process. This is where the mud comes out, and this is just a regular part of a disc that's been cut down. Somebody designed this. Some welder designed this about 15 to 20 years ago, and we haven't been able to improve it since. This is a remotely controlled valve that can be operated from inside the truck. They're required to have these systems. The mud is supposed to be pushed out of the tank either by air pressure or with a mechanical pump. These don't fill with rocks. They don't plug. They put out a nice spray. It's an even spray, and it helps to keep salts from being overloaded in certain areas. When the trucker fills up at the well site, he'll go out. We like to have them go to the back of the site and start spreading at the back. Sometimes they will start unloading as they enter the gate. They're not supposed to do that because they tend to put all the mud at the front, and it's not evenly spread. This operator's turning on the switch, and now we can see the mud coming out at the back of the tank. This is a close-up of the mud. It puts out a relatively fine spray. When it's close to the spreader, it's fairly thick, but it will spread out. And if you see a truck on your land that doesn't have something like this, you can invite the trucker to turn off his unit and leave the property and go back and put on the proper equipment. On any of the rules that are broken, they're supposed to follow these rules, and if they don't, if you don't want them to spread the mud at that instant, then you can tell them to leave. You can see how wide this pattern is. It's easy for the truckers to come back and match the next row whenever they do it in this manner. And here's the mud being spread from a different angle. And again, this is another angle. The thickness of the mud depends upon several things, and mostly it's the amount of salt and the amount of bentonite clay that's in the mud. We only allow 2/3 of an inch of bentonite clay to be applied, and that comes out to 200,000 pounds per acre. And they're allowed to have applied up to 6,000 pounds of salt. Before they start, the operator is the oil company that owns the rights to drill, and the drilling company is generally a subcontractor of that company. There are other subcontractors. For example, the soil farmers that do this work, they're a subcontractor. I don't think any of the major companies have their own soil farming companies. One tried it for a while and it just didn't work out. Soil scientists are brought in to evaluate the land. We have a list of soil scientists that we keep and we publish. They go out and they evaluate the land. We have several rules: soil type, soil thickness, depth to bedrock, depth to water, the amount of salinity. With a 6,000 pound limit, the soil scientist will take 4 samples for every 10 acres of your land, and then they can combine the 4 samples into one and take that to the laboratory. And it's analyzed for electrical conductivity and ESP. That is put into a report to our division, and along with many other things that are in the report, we decide whether or not it's allowed to be spread. They also have to include a soils map, a topographic map, and an aerial photograph of the site. And each one has to have the area marked where soil farming will take place. We have an 8% slope, maximum 8% slope that can be spread. The salts can't be over 6,000 pounds already, and the EC can't exceed 4,000, and the ESP can't exceed 10. So 6,000 pounds of salt. That's in the upper 6 inches of the soil. They're not allowed to apply the material any deeper. They can't inject it any deeper. They can't till it any deeper. The same with the bentonite clay. It's 200,000 pounds per acre in the upper 6 inches. With 200,000 pounds per acre, at first I thought that was just a tremendous amount of material, until we went out and collected a sample and we had it analyzed and got a density, and this is comes out to 2/3 of an inch thickness on 200,000 pounds. And 6 inches of soil over an acre will weigh 2 million pounds. So this is roughly 1/10 of the weight of the soil. On water-based mud, we understand that there will sometimes be a certain amount of oil that's picked up, either downhole whenever they hit an oil zone. It can end up in the pit from other sources. So we do allow up to 500 pounds per acre to be applied. Whenever 500 pounds per acre is applied, we also require that the soil be tilled. And if they put 50,000 pounds of bentonite per acre on your land, then it also has to be tilled in, even if it's water-based mud. We generally don't require water-based mud to be tilled, but the rules state that it has to be tilled in. So if you have some land that's never been plowed, and you don't want it to be plowed, then this is not an area that you want to use. Here's a form that you'll be asked to sign when someone comes. It's the landowner's permission slip. It's the landowner's permission slip. If you're a renter, you can't sign this and you can't authorize it. We've gotten into some real sticky situations when someone presents themselves as the landowner and they're only the renter. That gets into a civil situation, and we generally don't go to civil, get into civil cases. So if you've got a renter, tell them they better not do it. Whenever you're, what you see in this form is the surface owner. And that would be your name would go here, and here is the operator or his contractor or agent is allowed to apply this mud. They're allowed to apply up to the maximum per acre. And you can, a lot of times the oil company will be up there, and sometimes it will be the soil farming company. So you have to understand what's on there. If you want water-based mud, you would check here and initial it. If you want oil-based mud, do the same thing, check and initial. And if you want soils that have been contaminated by salt or crude oil, then you check there. It's very important that you know the area of the land that you own. Make sure you've got the right section, the right quarter call, and everything is right. We've had some instances where they've gotten the wrong one and then they end up putting it on a different farmer, and this is where the mud hits the fan. You sign here, date it, and we want your telephone number. When I review these, if there's anything wrong with this permit, I will hold it until I've had a chance to talk to the landowner. I want to make sure that it's right. One instance recently, there was one where they had put down the wrong section, township, and range. The legal was wrong. And then the soil farmer, I don't allow them to change it. And suddenly within 10 minutes, they had gotten a new signature from the landowner. And it was identical to the first one, except for the section, township, and range. And I said, we've got to talk to the landowner. The landowner was confused about this situation. He said that was the new legal was right, he thought, but he wasn't sure. And I don't have the ability to judge anyone's mind whenever they're making these decisions. That's out of my hands, and he said that he wanted it, so I had to go ahead and allow it. Down at the bottom, we have the districts. The state's divided into 4 districts. The northeast part of the state is District 1. The northwest is District 2. Southwest is 3. Their phone number is here, their address. If you have any questions, if you see anything that's being done incorrectly, you need to call them and let them know. Whenever you sign one of these, you need to keep a copy. If the soil farming, the person that's getting you to sign this says, we'll get a copy back to you, you can suggest that you sign 2 copies and that they sign one and you keep their signature. They need to be identical. And that'll keep them from having to come back, and it'll help prevent them from forgetting to bring it back. And then you've got a record of what you signed. And you also have a record of our phone numbers. This is the land application agent. This allows a specific, an oil company will designate the XYZ mud spreader to spread on his well on land. We've had instances where companies knew that a well was coming up in a specific area, and they would run out and get the landowner's signature, and so would other companies. And then the fight was on. Who's going to be the one that does the spreading? So we have a form that indicates which company is going to do the spreading. And you won't see this. This is a post-application report. This is the front page from the report. 90 days after spreading has stopped, the spreaders are supposed to submit this along with the records that they were required to keep on each load to us. They have to submit a map that indicates where they spread. They also have to put in the type of material, the number of acres that were originally in the permit, the acres that were used, the number in the pit and in the permit, and the number that were not used. If they mark some acres off as not being used, then that land can still be applied on another well. If you only want one well, then you're going to have to indicate that on the owner's form, and you can just write it on the form. A lawyer would probably tell me I'm wrong, but it's something you can still do. We can't stop you from putting anything on it. This is a compliance agreement, and this is something that our attorneys wanted to be put into the permit. It identifies the company that will do the spreading. It also identifies the operator of the oil well. And it states that they have read and understand these rules. I have found on more than one occasion some of the spreaders have never even seen the rules. We can't make them read them. Their telephone number is supposed to go here, the telephone number of the person that is responsible for overseeing the spreading. And then the rest is just legal things that have to be done. Can you get a copy of of some of these forms? If you have a computer that uses Windows, you'll have to have a small program installed on your computer. And we have that program at this location. We also have the telephone number for our information technology specialist, and you can call that if you're having trouble installing this program. It allows your computer to work with our database and in looking at the reports. And when you get this installed, just scroll down to the next to the lower part of this page, and there is a database for soil farming, and it lists all the soil farming sites that have been in the state, and you can find the one that's that relates to your land. This is the database that you'll see when you get into it. This one is in Garvin County, and this is the very first permit that's in that. That's not the first one that was done, but they're put in order by. Yeah, they're put in by section number. So here are all of section 1s, and they go on down to the next page, that are in this county. So if you're in section 1, then you can scroll down to the township and range that fit your area. And then highlight it just like this. Just click on it anywhere but on the quarter calls. But click anywhere else on it, and you can then go to this button. It says View Document Image. And you click on that, and it will bring up a list of all the documents that are related to that section, township, and range. Now, it may take us 2 or 3 days from the time that they're signed to get the original report into this database, but it will be there. You can download it, and you will have everything that we saw when we reviewed this permit. It'll name the oil company. It will give their phone number. It will name the spreading company. It will give their number. If you see someone, if you sign the XYZ spreading company to do the spreading on your land, and suddenly you see Bob Spreaders out there, these companies don't exist. If you see somebody else out there, you need to ask questions. We've had people that get a permit for a certain from a certain farmer to put mud on his land, and another soil farmer comes in and starts putting mud on it too. So you have to make sure that the name on the truck matches the name of the soil farmer that was designated to do that. If not, then you need to raise questions. Because the soil farmer that's putting mud on your land that's not authorized is not going to tell the oil company that he put mud there. And then you're not going to be paid for those barrels. This is not free money for you to just sign and to forget about it. You have to take an active role in these situations. When a company approaches you to do soil farming, you need to get at least 2 references, preferably in the county, and find out what other people think of them. I don't think I've ever had one soil farming company that has not made a mistake. Not one. Let me finish this, and I'll take your question. But the ones that fix their own problems, the ones that call us, are the ones that I tell them we've only got one problem. Everything I learned about disciplining soil farmers, I learned from disciplining my children. When you come in through the door in the morning or at the end of school, you better tell me. You better be the first one to tell me that there was a problem, and then we'll only have one problem to worry about. But if we find out from you or from some other source, then it's more difficult and it can get ugly. We are in the process right now of we have rules that are in the process of being approved by the governor and the legislature. I think they've been signed, but they haven't, not all the T's have been crossed and the I's dotted. It's going to go into effect in the 1st of July, and we will have a bonding requirement for these spreaders. We've had some bad problems with a few, and whenever they have to put up a bond, they tend to be more careful. But not everything's perfect. Yes, you had a question back there. Application of analysis of the mud or applications of the soil. They have to measure either the electrical conductivity, which is EC, or they can measure TDS or measure chlorides. It's basically the same meter, it's the same test, but it's calibrated differently. That's it. Okay. No metals. We have no requirements for any metals. We really haven't seen it as a problem. There are metals in some areas. In commercial soil farming situations, where they still are limited to 6,000 pounds of salt, we do require that they submit testing for metals, because they're taking material from a larger geographical area. And we allow 40 pounds of chromium and 40 pounds of arsenic. Those are the only two that we measure, or required to be measured. And in one situation, I'll get to you in a minute, in one situation we found just north of the Arbuckle Mountains that the naturally occurring chromium and arsenic exceeded our requirements. Small study was done, and with the clay type soils, it was found that would not be a problem. And in this situation, we upped that limit. Yes. No, in oil base, they are required to test it differently. Now, this is where we have a problem with the rules. We haven't had the opportunity to change them. Of all the problems we've seen in spreading oil-based and water-based mud, we've never had the amount of oil be the determining factor in how much mud can be spread. So our rules require that it be tested, but as a practical point, we don't require it. But if there's any pollution that exceeds at the end the amount of oil that's there, then it would have to be cleaned up, and that could be seen by oil standing on the surface. They're required to test every load, but when we get into oil base, they're required to mix it with gypsum, and in some instances limestone. And it's not to chemically alter the product, it's to physically bind all the soil, all the oil, and prevent it from becoming mobile. Yes. That would have to be questioned by the owner. The pH is, I think, one of the things you're talking about. The pH is relatively steady. Whenever they put bentonite clay into the mud, they have to adjust the pH upward to a certain level. I think it's 9.5. And at that point, it alters the properties of the bentonite clay, and it becomes more of a gel. And they have, everybody's heard probably horror stories about sodium hydroxide being very caustic, and it is, but they don't want the pH to go too high, so the oil companies really keep an eye on it themselves. So the pH is not monitored. Any other questions here?